always think it's incredibly valuable to kind of take this moment, and obviously we have obligations around charity law and reporting to you, but these moments also create a moment for kind of reflection and pause, and also just an opportunity to give thanks for the year that's been, because you can kind of move through life and it just feels like week after week, but it gives you an opportunity to kind of stop and celebrate and give thanks to God, who has been faithful to us as a congregation and continues to be faithful. And I'm just so thankful for this church community, for each of you being part of it. I love the diversity in our church, that we have people from all sorts of backgrounds and all of that, and we come together and we are the church. And one of the amazing things to me is always to think about the history a little bit. So this church began, as Jenny well knows, in 1989 as just a small group of people who decided. And so when you step into this church community, you're stepping into a story that began back in, well, at least in this form, began in 1989 and has continued all the way through. And the amazing thing to me is always that all of us, including Joe and I, we step into it for a season. And there's the people before us, and there's the people who will be after us. And it's like we step into a story that is bigger than the moment that we're in. And in this moment, we get to share that journey together. We get to walk together and do life together and encourage one another together and look to the Lord together. And for me, that's just a really exciting thing to think about. Back in 2021, I wrote this about us as a church. We're creating a future where MBCF is known for its voice of hope in the community. A beacon of life and light that both transforms the people who call it family, but also beckons others to come and experience that transforming hope. We give freely of ourselves to be hope in our region. It's time for us to arise and shine, not because of our brilliance, but because God has made himself present amongst us and is transforming our lives by his love and life. We have been called out of darkness and into his glorious light, and the message we carry is too good not to share. In recent years, as we've sought to kind of articulate who we are as a church, we've used this phrase, we'll put it on the screen. We're a Jesus-centered family, both living out and giving out hope. Hopefully, if you've been here a few years, this starts to get in your head. We're trying to get this phrase, we're a Jesus-centered family, both living out and giving out hope. And just really briefly, let me just talk us through it. Jesus-centered. This means that at the center of who we are as a community is the Son of God, Jesus. That Jesus is at the center of who we gather around Jesus. Our unity is found in Jesus. And we put him at the center because if we want to know what God looks like, we look to Jesus. It says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. To know what God is like, we need to look to Jesus. And so we're all about Jesus. We're learning to live our lives by following him, by dedicating ourselves to his words and his teaching, to let him shape and mold us as a people. He's at the center of all we do. We're a Jesus-centered family, and family is a funny word because depending on your upbringing, it has either really good or really bad connotations. And for most of us, it's mixed, isn't it? But family remains the main metaphor that Scripture uses when it talks about who we are as church. We're brothers and sisters, as the New Testament talks about. And like all families, you don't get to pick the people that are sitting next to you. Don't look at them now. You don't get to pick, but there's something about choosing to be in a family that is like, I commit to one another. We're all different. We've got different personalities, different gifts, different ways to annoy each other, I'm sure. But we're in that process together, learning how do we love. And family is often the place where that is tested the most. Will we really learn to love? It's our closest relationships that challenge us. And so as a family, we might not all agree on everything, but we agree to aim towards love, to support one another, to honor one another, to serve one another. So we're a family. Living out hope. And we as a fellowship don't want to be just talking the talk. We actually want to walk the walk. We want to be the kind of people who don't just hear about Jesus. We want to follow him in our actual lives, bringing change to our lives to try and make ourselves actual disciples of Jesus. Our faith is not a private and quiet decision we make in the quietness and then never live differently. We actually believe in life's changed. So we're living out hope. And in giving out hope, like I said, what we have is too good not to share. That actually we want to be generous in every possible way as a fellowship. So we want to be generous with our time and our resources and our money. We want to be generous because we have a generous God. And even the most generous amongst you, and I know there are many in this room, we're only scratching the surface of God's generosity towards us. And so our generosity to our communities, to the places we live, is rooted in that generosity of God. So we're a Jesus-centered family, both living out and giving out hope. But what might God be saying to us, church, in this season? What is the Lord whispering in our hearts? What is the season in which we're in right now? This year, my reflection, as I've just been asking the Lord what God might be saying to us, is that he wants to lead us as a people into a season of promises fulfilled. I believe God is wanting to lead us into a season where some of the things we've dreamed about or hoped for or prayed for might start to come a reality. Maybe it's things that have been on your heart for decades. Maybe it's things that have only been in your wildest dreams. I think there's a greater realization of God's promise in our future. And who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to step into the more that God has for us? Who doesn't want to see our community more alive in the presence of God, more established in the love of God, more on fire for Jesus, more people coming to salvation, more healings, more power? Who doesn't want to see that in our midst? Who doesn't want to see many coming to salvation and having broken lives transformed by the hope of the gospel? Who doesn't want to step into the promised land? But the reality of stepping into the promised land is that there's a journey to get there. And the main question I have for us today really is, are we prepared to go on a journey? Because there's a journey that gets us from where we are to where God has for us. And I often think, why? Why does there need to be this journey? Can't we step into the promises of God immediately? Can't God just give us everything that we desire in this moment? What's the holdup? And the hard reality is that this is the question that gets asked in the Bible again and again. And I think that a lot of it's to do with the Lord's mercy. Because if God blesses you when you cannot handle it, it can crush you. If God blesses you and you're not ready to receive it, the blessing isn't a blessing. And we see this in the natural all the time, where people who suddenly inherit vast sums of money or win the lottery or whatever it is, and what happens a few years later? They actually end up in a much worse place than they were before they began, usually with all the money gone and lots of brokenness all around them. And sadly, that can be true also in the spiritual, that God really actually desires to bless and fulfill his promises in our time. But are we prepared to receive what the Lord wants to give us? Blessing without containers can be dangerous. Let me remind us a little bit of that journey from the Old Testament. So the people of God were in slavery in Egypt. We know the story. You've seen The Prince of Egypt. You know, that's the film that we all go to for that. The people are in slavery in Egypt, and God raises up Moses, and he says to Moses, you're to bring the people out of Egypt, and I'm going to lead them to the promised land, a place of rest and beauty and abundant provision. And he then leads them to the mountain, and at the mountain, God makes that covenant promise with them. And then he doesn't take them the fast route, he takes them the long route to the promised land. He goes through the wilderness to the promised land. It's always fascinating to me that journey from Egypt to the promised land, straight line, 10 days. In reality, we know 40 years. Can you imagine? That'd be like trying to get from here to Dunbar, knowing it takes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and it takes you, 3 weeks. And you're like, but they do eventually enter into the promised land. And that journey of getting from slavery to promise was actually purposely designed by God to try and get the people ready. There are other reasons that the Bible gives for us, but one of them is that God was actually trying to prepare the people so that they could enter the promised land and receive the promises he wanted to pour out upon them. And I sense the Lord saying to us in this time is, are we prepared to go on a journey to get ready, to be prepared? So for the next kind of couple of months up to Easter, we're actually going to be exploring this journey of through the wilderness into the promised land. But today I just want to look at one little aspect, one little story on the journey. And if you want to follow along, we're going to be in Numbers 13. So if you want to, you can. If you've got your Bibles, feel free to follow along. We're going to read quite a little bit of Numbers 13, a little bit of 14 today. Let me give you some context as we look at that. Now, Numbers is a book which kind of it tells the story of the people of God going from Egypt to the promised land. And it's called Numbers because it's full of kind of like census data. It's full of like logistics and operations and how did it all work out and how many people were over here and how many people were in each tribe. So it's called Numbers because it's kind of like that kind of logistical look at that journey. And so the moment that we're going to look at today, the people of God are already 2 years into the journey in the wilderness. And so they've already been to the mountain, received the promises of God. The 10 Commandments have come down. And then they've been following God as he leads through the desert. And they've got this amazing system where the cloud of God's glory comes down over the tabernacle and they stop. And then the cloud lifts, and then they've got it, right, everyone pack up camp. They pack up camp. There's all the instructions and numbers about how to do it. They pack up the camp, and then they move, and then the Lord stops, and they go, right, okay, we're here. And so they've been doing that for 2 years. And they now come to the desert of Paran. And and also just to say, just before that, they've also been complaining about the menu options. And so the Lord has been providing manna, bread from heaven, and he's also been quail, which is a fascinating story. He blows on the wind thousands of birds, and they all land all the way around the camp, and then they have to go out and get lunch. So that's been going on, and then they end up at the desert of Paran, which is this area just to the south of the promised land. So if you imagine they've been through this desert area from Egypt all the way up into, and they can now see the promised land. Canaan is in front of them, and they're in the south, and they can see what God is leading them into. And this is where this pivotal moment happens today. So we're going to read Numbers 13, and we're going to read quite a bit, so just listen to the story. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." So we know the story. You get 12 men from the 12 tribes. We're going to go. Verse 17. When Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, "Go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes." So it's kind of like, God's like, let's find out all the information you can about this new land that I am giving to you. Verse 21. So they went up and explored the land of the desert of Zin as far as Rehob towards Lebo Hamath. They went up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where I'm going to get all these names wrong, Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, lived. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Verse 23, when they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the valley of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. So just pause there. So the goal is they've been sent out, these 12 spies, to go into the land and to find out information about what this land that God has promised to them looks like. What are the fortifications? It's all like these details, like find out like what is the actual reality on the ground. And then they are told to bring back some produce. And they bring this ridiculous sized grapes back, which require 2 men on a pole to carry a branch of grapes back on their journey. And it's a 40-day journey. Within 40 days they come back. So they've gone and then they come back. Verse 26, it's time for the report. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at the Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us. It does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. So it kind of starts off, they're like, this land is amazing. Like, it's got some great stuff. Look at the size of these ridiculous grapes that we've brought back. But then the report kind of starts to go downhill. You sense the language changing. There's powerful people in the land. Verse 30. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. This was a bad report, and things are going downhill here. It's amazing how the crowd escalates, isn't it? One person shares some bad news, and suddenly everyone's panicking. We're now in chapter 14. We're nearly there. Stick with me. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into the land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Verse 10. But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. This is about to get worse. The Lord said to Moses, how long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the signs I've performed among them? I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them. But I will make you into a nation greater and stronger than they. So this is a bad moment, if you hadn't noticed that. This is probably one of the low points, I wouldn't say the lowest, but it's one of the low points for the people of God in the Old Testament. And, it's a really bad day at the office. And so for Moses, what happens next is Moses pushes back against God. We're not going to read all of this section, which always amazes me. How many times does Moses say, no, God, we're not doing that? Isn't that amazing? Like, the things he's seen God do, the power he's seen displayed on the mountain, and yet Moses says, no, let's not do that plan. And so he pushes back and he says, if you wipe out the people, then all the Egyptians are going to mock you for who you are. And so then God basically agrees. He says, okay, I won't destroy the people, but the punishment is going to be that none of the generation other than Caleb and Joshua are going to get to enter into the promises of God. And it's one of those really sad moments because, these are the people that were in slavery, that were offered the promises. And just the sadness of this moment of like they didn't step into the promises of God in this moment. They're actually on the doorstep of the promises. They can see the promised land. What God has offered them is in front of them. And their choices in this moment are going to cause this generation to spend the rest of their life in the wilderness, and they will never enter the promises of God. There's sadness in this moment. I always feel for Moses in this moment because he's doing his best to try and lead these people, and yet this is where they've come to. So they're 2 years into the journey. They could, in this moment, have been the moment of stepping into the promises, but instead they have 38 more years living off bread and quail. And so there's a weight to this moment. And how do they get there? Well, they basically get afraid. Out of the 12 spies, 10 of them decide this isn't a good plan. And the results of that are quite painful. It's not that they don't actually see the promises of God. It's that the challenges seem too overwhelming. And the report hinges on this one focus. And we'll put this on the screen: grapes or giants? And that's the question I want to leave us with today, is grapes or giants? If we're looking ahead to the future of what God is wanting to do in our midst, in this region, across East Lothian, through the church, what do we see, grapes or giants? Let's talk about them. Giants. Well, the people of God here in this moment, they're not making up the problem. It's not that their facts are wrong. The cities are actually incredibly well fortified. We're going to read, if we go into Joshua, you then get obviously the walls of Jericho with that famous story. This is an impenetrable city. And so it's not that they're lying or making it sound worse than it actually is. There is a reality. These are really well fortified cities. And then this idea of giants, they refer to the descendants of Anak. And this is a really fascinating story. If you know anything about the Nephilim, it says that they're the descendants of the Nephilim. The Nephilim is a very strange story from Genesis 6 that you can read about just before the flood. And it says that there were these spiritual beings that came and married with human women and created this new offspring that were effectively giants, this new race of humans who were larger than average. And so this story actually comes through the whole Old Testament. You can kind of trace this journey. But when it says the descendants of Anak, it's talking about these kind of humans, but different, who have been corrupted by these spiritual forces. And one of the most famous examples, of course, is Goliath. So when you get David and Goliath and you're like, who is this giant? Where did he come from? It's because he is a descendant of Anak. He is someone who descends from this whole weird story in Genesis 6. So there are actually giants in the land. They're not making that up. There are actually fortified cities. So the challenges are actually real. They do have warriors. And, on paper, they're probably stronger than the people of God in the desert. So the men spreading this report are not lying. There actually are stronger people. Let's look at the grapes. Now, these are, like I say, these are some crazy grapes. You can't get these grapes from Aldi. And I know that for a fact because they wouldn't last the 20-day journey back. If the grapes from Aldi last you more than 2 days, you're doing well. So these are not your average grapes. These are some sort of supernatural grapes in some ways. They're huge. And then the other term that gets used for these promises of God is this strange term almost of the land of milk and honey. Have you ever thought about that? This is not honey nut cornflakes in the morning. That's not the picture we're to have here. The idea of the land of milk and honey, the land of milk is basically saying this is a land that's very good for agriculture. You can have goats and sheep and cows in this land. The pastures are great. It's a kind of agricultural kind of language of saying this is the land of milk. So in other words, this is a place where abundant harvest can come from animals being pastured in the land. And then this idea of honey, this isn't bee honey as we think about it. Most people think this is kind of the syrup that comes from dates that would have been very prominent in that region. So, and this is a picture of luxury and sweetness. So they're saying you're going to be stepping into a land that's great for agriculture and it's great for luxury and sweetness and abundance. And there's a big contrast going on here because Egypt was a very fertile land, but only down the Nile. Even today, if you look at like a satellite imagery of Egypt, you see the Nile coming down and green bits all the way down the side of it, but the rest is kind of desert. And so it was a lot of work to farm in Egypt because you had to pump water out of the Nile to kind of irrigate the lands and all that sort of stuff. And so the contrast is that this is a land where actually you don't have to put all that work into pumping the water out. The valleys and the hills in the land actually naturally collect the rain. And it creates this kind of very rich kind of soil and land. And of course, the big contrast is that the last 2 years of being in the desert versus being in a land that is great for agriculture and great for things. So the reality was this new land they were moving into was really, really good land. It was a beautiful land that was ripe for a great economy, that there could be a thriving economy in there. So grapes or giants, both of these were actually true. And ahead of them lay great abundance, but ahead of them also lay great challenge. So why was this report so damaging? Well, it wasn't so much about the facts, it was the conclusions they drew from the facts. And the big missing factor in their decision-making, God. The whole thing they missed in this moment is that God was with them. And Caleb's the first one that spots this because he sees the report going sideways and he steps in and he silences the people and he says, no, we should go up and take possession of the land for we can certainly do it. I don't think Caleb was being arrogant in this moment. He wasn't saying, giants, easy. He was saying, well, you're forgetting who's with us. And it comes out even stronger in Joshua's reply. He says, do not rebel against the Lord and do not be afraid of the people of the land because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but God is with us. The difference is the two of them actually were conscious of God with them, and 10 of them were not even aware that that would make a difference. Because they had lost sight of, even in the last 2 years, the only way they got out of Egypt was not because of their military strength. Like they escaped the most powerful empire in the world at the time, and they walked out. There was no fighting, there was no all of that. And how did they do that? Because God did it for them. They had survived 2 years in a desert with hundreds of thousands of people. And how had they done it? Because God had done it. And so the thing they've done is they've lost sight of the difference is not whether there are grapes or giants, it's actually is God with you. Because if God is with you, he will lead you forward. He will lead you forward. And it's so sad that there was only 2 out of the 12, 2 out of the whole of the nation of Israel that actually stepped into those promises. So what might God be saying to us through this year? Maybe when we look to the future, we see the grapes. Maybe we see like the promises of God, the things that, maybe you're thinking about your own life. What are the promises of God you see in your own life, the things you want to step into? Or maybe when you look ahead, you see the challenges, you see the difficulties, the things that might knock you off the path, the things that seem to limit you. What kind of report would you give looking to the future? But the most important thing about our report of the future would be, what's our conclusions? Is God with us? What will we conclude? And what might that look like for us, just thinking about us as a church? Well, we can maybe dream about what are the grapes. What are the provisions that God wants to give us in the future? Maybe as we think about our community here, is that we would see many people come to salvation. Maybe we'd see people flocking in here who need to know Jesus. Maybe we'd see very broken people come in and get restored and transformed and healed. Maybe people whose lives have been tormented in all sorts of ways would find freedom and step into the life of God. Maybe people would be healed by the power of God. Sick people would come in and walk out well. Maybe the community would turn to us as a church and say, you look like you've got the answer to the problems that we're facing. Maybe poverty would be broken locally. Maybe we'd find ways to bring food to those who need it. Maybe we would double in size. Maybe these are the promises of God. Maybe these are things that he might do in our midst. That's the grapes. But what are the giants? What are the things you look at and you go, oh my goodness, there's no way this could happen? We're just a small church. We don't, we're just a small church. We don't even have our own building. We don't even have a permanent place that we can say is our home. Or maybe, as awesome as the finance report and stuff is, we don't have the resources to do all the things that we'd need to do. Maybe we just don't have enough volunteers or people who are going to make themselves available in this season. Or maybe if all these broken people come to our church, it will just get too messy, too difficult, too many problems, too many challenges, too awkward. Or if we grew too big, maybe it'd just be difficult to get to know people. Or maybe we'd walk in and go, I don't recognize anyone on Sunday, why would I come to church? These are the sorts of giants that we might think about when we think about the future. But the question is not whether there's grapes or whether there's giants. The question is God with us? Will we press in and say yes to all that God has for us, knowing it's about him? It's about what he wants to do in our midst. I know for myself, I don't want to be part of that generation that misses out on something God is offering me because I failed to believe him. I don't want to be part of that generation stuck in the wilderness. I'd rather take the 2-year journey through the wilderness than the 40-year journey through the wilderness. But if there's a journey I need to go on with God to prepare my heart for what he wants to do, I want to say yes. And I think that's how we set ourselves up for the future well. Because the big thing I sense the Lord saying to us this year is get ready. Get ready. Prepare your hearts, humble yourself before the Lord. There's a season in which he invites us to learn things, to grow as disciples. Will we ask God to prepare us in this time? Because if we don't prepare ourselves, we might not be able to receive all that God wants to do in our midst. So there's lots of things I think this preparation looks like, but I just want to finish by just sharing one thing that I think the Lord is calling us to as a community, to prepare our hearts and to prepare what he wants to do. And that one thing is, I believe it's time to pray. I believe it's time for us as a community to stand up together and pray. To come together in unity and call on the Lord's name and say, Lord, would you come in this time, in this place? Would you prepare our hearts? I believe the Lord is calling us into a season where we should pray together. I'm going to share a little bit more about this next week, but one thing as a leadership team that we've been thinking about for a while is how do we call us together as a church to pray more together? We know we have lots of people who pray individually, but where's the space where we come together and we pray with one voice to call out on the Lord to move in our time? And we're going to take the first 3 weeks of March, and we're going to use that as a dedicated time to say to the Lord, we're seeking you. We're calling upon you because we know without you we can't do anything. First 3 weeks in March, we're going to dedicate time to coming together to pray, to be praying on our own, to be praying together, and to be asking the Lord to move. One family standing together before the Lord, humbling ourselves and asking him to move in our time. And I have a real expectancy about what God might say to us and what he might do in that season. So put it in your diary, first 3 weeks of March. I'll explain a little bit more next week about how it might look. We want those 3 weeks to be us coming before the Lord, to seek his face, to ask him to move in our time, to give us the courage to step into the promises that he has for us. And today I just want to finish with with a little bit of prayer. I would love it if we could just maybe finish the service today by just getting into little groups of 2s and 3s and just pray. Just pray for what God might want to do in and through this community in this time. So just get into little groups of 2 or 3. We're going to just pray for a few minutes, and then we'll be free to go through for teas and coffees. So just gather with the people around you.